I'm Natalie Wadley. I've been serving as the director here for a little while at the Cultural Center. And before that, I was the exhibits and programs manager, which I'm also still doing. So that's me. A little housekeeping. Sorry for any technical difficulties anybody has, or if we have, we've tested everything and it all seems to be running fine, but you never know. So excuse any of that. And Jeremy Turner is our presenter tonight. He is a Shawnee tribal citizen, and he's had an interest and passion in carrying on Shawnee traditions, language, and ceremonies. He's been really active with kind of working with the Cultural Center, helping us out with all kinds of different things pretty much since we opened and possibly before. I wasn't here before we opened. And so, yeah, he's a great supporter. He's talking tonight on 18th century clothing, dressing for success, Shawnee clothing of the 18th century. For questions and comments as he presents, if you can just type those into our chat box, and then at the end, I will read them off for him to answer. And yeah, just let us know. And I will now turn it over and let him talk about Shawnee clothing.
Natalie, appreciate it. So hatito niwikana. So hello everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and talk to you guys a little bit about Shawnee clothing during the 18th century. And in doing so, what we'll do is draw from original period accounts, firsthand accounts of folks that actually witnessed and lived with Shawnee people in the Ohio River Valley in the 18th century, which is the 1700s for those that don't understand that. And we will also look at some paintings and that were actually drawn and painted during that time period by eyewitnesses that saw these folks wearing these clothing items. And then finally, we will look at original examples that are material cultural items, whether they be leggings, shirts, things like that, that are still in museum collections today that we can look at that were actually collected during that same time frame. And we'll also kind of delve in a little bit to some of the trade lists, things that were available to Shawnee tribal members during the 18th century to actually see what they were in fact purchasing. So if anyone that is watching if everyone could go ahead and mute their microphones so we don't have any feedback, make sure we're doing that. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. What I'd like to do is, and some of you I might have to kind of move this down because it's kind of blocking some of the screen there. So I want to start with women's clothing because women are really the backbone of our communities, and they are, like as I said, the foundation. They bring life forth on this earth, and so women are very important to not only the Shawnee people but all other Native American tribes. So I'm going to start by talking about their clothing in this presentation. And with that, we'll start out with a quote from, I believe it is Zeissberger, David Zeissberger, who was a Moravian missionary that lived with the Delawares and the Shawnees in Pennsylvania and Ohio during the 1700s. And they founded some Christian mission towns in both Pennsylvania and Ohio. And so they saw all of these folks firsthand, knew them well, and took down accounts and journals of what the folks were wearing and various customs. So with that, I want to talk about this quote from Zeissberger on women. Women are distinguished in dress only in this respect, that instead of a match coat, for you guys that don't know, a match coat is actually a wearing blanket, which is what you see up in this top photo, this blanket that's thrown over DJ's shoulder. That's what's termed a match coat. So instead of wearing a match coat, they wear a shroud over their hips, bound about the body next to the skin, removed neither day or night, and extending but little past the knees. They anoint their hair liberally with bear's fat, so much that it shines. Their adornment consists of hanging much wampum, coral, and silver about their necks. And for those that don't know, coral is mainly they're talking about white beads, the white, usually about size 8, or maybe some of them are a little bit bigger, like pound type beads. But the coral is those white beads. It's not unusual for them to have great belts of wampum depending from their neck. Their shirts and shrouds they adorn with many silver buckles. Those silver buckles are small ring brooches that are made out of sterling silver and were a very common trade item for decoration. It is also customary for them to sew red, yellow, or black ribbon on their match coats from top to bottom, being very fond of bright things. Men as well as women wear silver bracelets, and the latter also arrange silver clasps in their hair or wear a band about the head with as many silver ornaments on it as it can hold. So what they're talking about there is they're wearing either in their basically their hair that's pulled back behind their head. They're wearing these silver hair clasps that we'll see in the next slide. And if they can't afford those, then they will wrap ribbons or a wool gartering around their ponytail as decoration. But also the ones that can afford it are wearing these sterling silver bands that you see in period drawings and stuff, and they have punch outs on them, and some folks even put them around their hats like hat bands, and they also hang earrings on them for decoration. So that's what he's talking about having the women with the band about the head with as many silver ornaments on it as it will hold. That's what the reference is there that he's talking about. All these things they secure from the whites, principally from the traders who in times of peace bring their wares to the Indian towns in exchange for skins and pelts. So with that little description, I'll talk a little bit about these photos over here on the side. What we see here is my cousin Shadeja. She's wearing basically what is described in this account. So we see that she has the shroud wrapped around her waist, the white shirt. She has the leggings on, moccasins. She even has kind of an overcoat here that she's wearing that was common for women of the colonial period to wear as well. And then on this bottom, you see my wife. She's wearing a very similar outfit. She has a white shift on, which is a kind of an undergarment that women wore during the period. But Indian women were wearing them, basically as shirts instead of just undergarments. And then she has that short gown or bed jacket, as it's also known as, over top of it. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So these are those silver clasps that they're wearing in their hair that the description was describing. And these are actually reproductions made that are based on original silver items that have been collected over the years. And these silver clasps would have been put around the ponytail in the back, or the hair that was pulled back and tied. And then a lot of times there'll be little holes punched on the side, and they can lace silk ribbon through there to tie it around that ponytail. And some of these were even graduated sets that were put together. There would be small holes punched in the tops and bottom of these, and they would be attached with little rings from the largest down to the smallest. So basically like a graduated set of armor plates, and those would be worn about the ponytail on the back of the head. And then you also see a few of these examples of bracelets that were worn as well. Men and women both wore these silver armbands and bracelets that we'll see from these descriptions. Also, on this photo, on the bottom right, you'll see a pair of original moccasins that were collected during the 18th century. These actual moccasins, I believe, are in a a British collection overseas, and they are fairly simple, have just a simple line of quill work that's going down the seam, the center seam of the moccasin to cover up that sewing. And then they have a little bit of ribbon on them with the edge beadwork. Whoever is not muted there might go ahead and mute that for us so we don't have any playback. All right, and then also for decoration around the flaps and on the tops, you'll see these tin. Usually these are made out of old tin kettles that are been cut up and rolled into cones with the deer hair stuffed inside of it. This is the buck's tail that's been dyed with bloodroot or madder, cochineal, or even sometimes little bits of red wool could be used to extract the dye from by boiling it, and that's been seen in some historical accounts. So they would use that to dye the deer tail red, and then use that hair inside of these cones. All right, so this next slide, this is a quote from Zeissberger as well. Many women wear a white shirt over their shroud, decorated with silver buckles. The more the better. Red or blue leggings are worn, made of fine cloth, joined by a broad band of silk bordered with coral. There again, they're talking about those white beads, and then the silk ribbon on the actual shroud skirt, or even on the edges of the leggings that we'll see. When they wear a white shirt, which is preferably of fine linen, it is stained red with cinnabar about the neck. And cinnabar is another term for vermilion. And vermilion was a red powder pigment that was brought over here by the traders. And it was highly sought after by all American Indian tribes on the East Coast, or in the East, to use for paint. And it was a natural material, or a material made out of mercuric sulfide. So it had mercury in it. So it's kind of crazy to think that we were painting our bodies with bear grease and this cinnabar or vermilion, and actually putting that on our skin when it actually had mercury in it. But at that time we did that. So, but that's what this cinnabar is. And so the shirt, after being worn, would get that red staining around the collar and stuff. Usually that's a lot of times from people wiping their hands on it. They're wiping their faces on their shirts in that area. They're wiping their hands on it. So that's where you're getting that red on the top of the shirt like that. So in this slide, we have a pair of moccasins that come from the 1700s. And I believe these are in Benjamin West. He was a painter during the 18th century, and he collected a lot of artifacts from American Indian communities in Pennsylvania, New York, the Ohio country area. And so these were a pair of moccasins that he collected and brought back with him. And actually a few of the models in his paintings wore these items when he painted them. So you'll see on these mocks, they're made out of the brain tan deer skin. It's a smoked deer skin, so it's got that brownish color. And then you have the porcupine quill work covering the seams, that center seam on the moccasin, and then also the decoration on the flaps. And usually there would be also the porcupine quill work covering the back seam as well. But on a lot of these photos, they never take a photo of the back of the moccasin, so we don't get to see them that often. But again, you see the tin cones with the deer hair in it for decoration as well. Also on this photo over here of Dolly Haney, who is a Delaware Shawnee tribal member, you can see her wearing clothing based on these descriptions. She has a white shirt on, her red wool skirt made out of wool shroud with silk ribbon decorating the bottom of it, and then beaded with the white edge beads or coral beads that are described in these accounts as well. She also has on a pair of blue wool leggings with the silk ribbon on it, and then some finger woven leg ties, and a pair of just plain moccasins. So brings us to our next slide here. This account comes from Oliver Spencer, who was taken captive by a mixed group of Shawnees and Senecas that were known as the mixed band of Seneca Shawnees in Ohio. They're also this group of folks are the ones in Ohio or Pennsylvania that are historically known as the Mingo. So if anybody is familiar with reading about the Mingo in Ohio and Pennsylvania, this is who we're talking about. It's the group of a mixed band of Shawnees, Seneca, Cayugas. They're really all people from all 6 of the Iroquois Confederacy communities, as well as a mixture of Nanticokes, Piscataways, Conoys, and Tutelos that had removed from Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, and removed to the Susquehanna River Valley at basically the late early 1700s. So that was this group that Spencer was living with in the 1790s when he was captured. While he was there, he was adopted by a woman whom he called Kokachee, which is basically just a Shawnee, generic Shawnee term for grandmother. And so that's what he called her, Kokachee. And in this quote, he's describing her dress. And they lived at that time very near where Toledo, Ohio is, on the Maumee River, right where the Auglaize tees into the Maumee. So here's Spencer's description of her clothing. Her dress was like that of the other squaws in general and was very plain and simple, consisting of a calico shirt extending about 6 inches below the waist and fastened at the bosom with a silver brooch. So what they're talking about is, a blue wool skirt that had white selvage, very much like what you see on my wife in this photo to the right. This is a blue wool broadcloth skirt, and it has a white area selvage that was left from the dye process. This would have been covered during the dye process, and it's almost like tie dye, where an area was left undyed because it was covered during that time. We were very fond of that broadcloth, and it came in a couple different colors, with blue being the most common and red the next most common. Also, there was a difference in price. Blue was the least expensive, and the red cloth was very expensive because of the process that it took to dye it that red. So we see this on these trade lists later, that the prices associated with each, you could tell. So during the time period, during the 1700s, really the clothes that you had and the color even is really indicative of your status in the community. Just very much like people try to wear fancy, expensive clothes today to denote, how wealthy they are. Well, during the 1700s, it was very similar in that this blue wool shroud was basically the blue jeans of the time period, and then the red wool was more expensive. I don't even know what a expensive pair of jeans are these days, because I don't buy into that stuff anymore. But that would have been the equivalent of your most expensive jeans that you could buy today, that red wool. And so usually only chiefs, war captains, very, very good hunters, and their wives and kids would have that red wool cloth. So to go back, that silver brooch as a shroud or a petticoat, which was simply a 1.5 yards of 6/4 blue cloth with white selvage. That's what we're talking about, wrapped around her waist and confined with a girdle. So that was, it could be a finger woven belt, could be a tump line, or it could just be you know, a basswood bark cordage or piece of leather that she used to tie basically her skirt up with. And then the top of the skirt was folded down over top of that wrap, you know, that tie. So even if it was a finger woven belt, everybody else would have never saw it because it was covered up by the top of the skirt that was folded up over it. So that's why you don't see these finger woven sashes on these women. Women did not, in the 1700s, women did not wear sashes over their shirts and covering their shirts, and that's why you do not see them in these photos of my family and friends that are doing these reenactments. Let's see. Extended just a little bit below the knee, and a pair of leggings or Indian stockings of the same cloth, sewed so as to fit the leg, leaving a border 2 inches projecting from the outside and extending to the instep, and a pair of plain moccasins. So that was her dress. She was wearing just very common average dress, a utilitarian. You can see that for her, she was an older lady, and that's what you see in a lot of these accounts. Older women weren't wearing very decorated stuff. They were just wearing the basics, and a lot of times because too they were working in these clothes, so you're not wearing your finest clothes while you're out there doing everyday mundane tasks. All the young and middle-aged women are passionately fond of finery. The young belles particularly have the tops of their moccasins curiously wrought with beads, ribbons, and porcupine quills. So that's talking about the decorations that we see on the moccasins. The borders of their leggings and the bottom edges of their shrouds are tastefully bound with ribbons and edged with beads of various colors. So white is the most common color that these silk ribbon or leggings and skirts are edged with. But then we do see, from an archaeological context, we see a robin's egg blue bead that, you know, is most likely used in this edge beading, and sometimes we see black beads, and those beads are about the size of a number 8 seed bead, is roughly the size of those beads. Frequently on their moccasins and leggings, they'll have small tufts of deer hair dyed red and confined in a small piece of tin rattling as they walk. So here we're seeing multiple accounts describing the same dress, you know, across the board. And then we also are looking at original items that are showing exactly what is being described in these accounts. So over here on the left, we have a photo of one relative of mine and a friend of hers that we took a few years to Colonial Williamsburg to do some programming out there. And there they are dressed in the clothing based on these descriptions here. So you see the skirt, leggings, moccasins. This is a calico type shirt, which is different from the white linen shirt. Calico is a cotton cloth, and it becomes a little bit more common in the latter part of the 1700s, and it becomes kind of the thing that everybody wants to wear. It's because that is where you know, the idea of natives wearing these calico shirts come from. These lively color shirts comes from this time frame when they were using this cotton calico cloth to make shirts out of. So that's what we're seeing.
Dude, I guarantee you.
There you go. Mute yourself. All right. Next slide. This one's from John Heckwelder, who was again another one of the Moravian missionaries that worked with Zeissberger at the Moravian towns in Pennsylvania and Ohio. The women, at the expense of their husbands or lovers, lined their petticoat and blue or scarlet cloth blanket or covering with choice ribbons of various colors, or with gartering. Gartering is a wool tape that is it's like silk ribbon, but it's made out of wool and it's cheaper. So again, this is a sign of status and wealth by what you can afford to decorate your clothing with. with gartering, on which they fix a number of the silver brooches, those little small ring brooches that we'll see in some later slides that were used to decorate their clothing items, whether they be shirts or leggings. They adorn their leggings in the same manner, and their moccasins are embroidered in the neatest manner with colored porcupine quills and are besides almost entirely covered with various trinkets. They have, moreover, a number of little bells and brass thimbles fixed around their ankles, which when they walk make a tinkling noise. The women make use of vermilion, so that's that cinnabar that we were talking about earlier, in painting themselves for dances, but they're very careful and circumspect in applying the paint so that not to offend or create suspicion in their husbands. There is a mode of painting which is left entirely to loose women and prostitutes. So what you see in this photo over here is my wife and my son and my son-in-law, Talon Silverhorn, in the back here. We were in Colonial Williamsburg a few years back, and here's Shannon dressed based on, you know, these accounts. And you can see she's got, and we'll see this in a minute on another slide, she's got her hair pulled back and tied, wrapped with silk ribbon, and she has the red vermilion in the paint spot on her cheeks, which was indicative of a lot of the Ohio country tribes women. We would wear that. Women wore that red round dot on their cheekbones. Here's an example from an archaeological context. It was actually really a grave good that this was taken from in Ohio. Grave rob, basically, but the laws in Ohio unfortunately do not stop this at this time, which we need to have amended. But here we see a tin, basically a little tin containing little brass thimbles inside of it, along with beads and some earrings and some other things that we see here. And these brass thimbles, once they were taken out, were seen to be on a leather braided, basically almost like a bracelet, a little bracelet here. And this is very much like what we were reading about in those descriptions earlier. And this was from a Shawnee town in Ohio, is where this was dug up. And these little brass thimbles would have been worn around the ankles and when our women danced. And so that's what Zeissberger and Heckwater were describing in their earlier descriptions that we were seeing. And also here we see some brass hawk's bells, and these were very common trade item. These also came out of an archaeological context in Ohio from one of our towns in Ohio, I believe. And these little bells are also used around the ankles on the women when they, you know, dance, to make the, you know, little tinkling noise when they would dance as well. All right, this next account comes to us from Nicholas Creswell, who worked alongside of a trader by the name of John Anderson that was operating out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the trading post in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And John Anderson's main trading operations were in Ohio among the Shawnee and the Delaware. And he moved a lot through the Moravian mission towns on the Muskingum River, and eventually married a Delaware woman and had children with her. And that one of the children became a chief by the name of William Anderson, who Anderson, Indiana is named after now. But anyway, so Nicholas Creswell, he was a young 20-something-year-old guy, come over here from London, I believe, and wanted to go to the Indian country. And he engaged with Anderson and helped him in his trading expeditions out into the Ohio country. While he was out there, he kept a journal, and so this account comes from his journal. And they were working in the Ohio country in 1774, which for those that know was right around the year of Dunmore's War, which was a very significant and important time in Shawnee history. So Creswell says the women wear the same sort of shirts as the men, and a sort of shirt or short petticoat that comes no lower than the knee. Leggings and moccasins the same as the men. They wear their hair long, curled down the back in silver plates. So those are those silver plates that we showed earlier on that second slide, if they can afford it. If not, it's tied in a club with red gartering. So that's what we're seeing here on my wife. So this is silk ribbon, but also the red wool gartering was used as well. And that's what my daughter has her hair tied with on this photo. They wear no rings in the nose, but plenty of them in the ears. So only the men were the ones that would wear the nose rings. Okay. This account again is from Zeissberger. Women never paint their faces with a variety of figures, but rather make a round red spot upon each cheek and redden the eyelids, the tops of their heads, and in some cases, the rims of their ears and their temples. So that's what we're seeing in this photo of Shannon. And here's just an example of maybe like some late 17, early 1800s moccasins from maybe Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York area, with the silk ribbon that is kind of, basically fell apart along the edge, but it also has the porcupine quill decorations on it as well. And then the white coral beads for edge beads. Shirts that women would wear outside of the plain white linen shirts that the men would wear were these not bed gowns, but shifts, like I talked about earlier. This was known as a shift or a chemise, the French called it in the 1700s. And these, again, were meant to be worn by European women underneath of their overclothes that they would wear over top of these. This was basically like their underwear, but Indian women wore these as their shirt, their regular shirt. We see from some of the paintings from the 1700s. So these are examples that are collected in museums today here. And you can see there are various degrees of decoration. This is a plain one. Then we have a little bit of decoration around the top. And then over here we have bed lace wrapped around the sleeves and the neck. So they were varying degrees of decoration on those shifts. Again, like I talked about earlier, not only are we looking at these accounts, these firsthand accounts, but we're also looking at 18th century paintings that will actually put some of this into view so that we could view some of the things that these firsthand accounts are describing. And that's exactly what we're seeing in these paintings here. These are both 18th century paintings. This one is titled a Mohawk Woman, but it very much looks very much like the descriptions of what Zeissberger, Heckwelder, Creswell, and all of them were describing. They were seeing in Ohio at the same time frame. She's got a blue wool skirt with the silk ribbon decoration, and then you can also see the little round. These are those sterling silver ring brooches that were being described in some of those accounts. You'll see that she has a pair of leggings on with flaps, and they are edged in the silk ribbon, and you also see those silver ring brooches on them. She has her moccasins, her shift, and then a bed jacket, most likely over top of it. Then around her, she has a wearing blanket, which, like I said earlier, was called a match coat. And these were a lot of times decorated with lots of silk ribbon and beads on them as well. And this other painting over here on the right, I believe this is by Ben West, I think, painted this one. And again, you could see wearing a shift, most likely a shift type shirt, white linen shirt, a blue wool wrap skirt with some beadwork, and then the silk ribbons on it. Again, blue leggings, and then the moccasins, and then she has a red match coat thrown over her shoulder, and she's nursing her child on a cradle board here. So, all right, now we're going to go ahead and jump into men's dress. So we'll start off with Zeissberger description of the men's dress. Their dress is light. They do not hang much clothing upon themselves. If an Indian has a match coat, that is a blanket of the smaller sort, a shirt and a breechclout and a pair of leggings, he thinks himself well dressed. In place of a blanket, those who are in comfortable circumstance and wish to be well dressed wear a shroud, which is basically 2 yards of that blue or red cloth that was used to make the leggings or the skirts. A lot of times the shroud was the one that had the white selvage edge that we were seeing earlier. Blue, red, or black cloth, which is they throw lightly over themselves and arrange much as they would a match coat. Trousers they do not wear, but their hose or leggings basically reach considerably above the knee and are held together by a piece of wool and extending only to the feet. To some extent, they supply the place of trousers. If they desire to go in state, they wear such hose with a silken stripe extending from top to bottom and bordered with white coral. Again, the white beads on the edging. So he's describing a difference between clothes that you're going out and hunting in, just, regular everyday clothes, and clothes that you're going to town or going to a function or, going to something of importance. You'll wear your better clothing. Their shoes are made of deer skin, which they prepare themselves basically by brain tanning. The women being particularly skilled in doing this and working all manner of designs. Mingo women excel at all others in this particular. So there's that description, Mingo, that we're talking about. So that is actually just the mixed band of Seneca Cayugas, the Piscataways, Nanticokes, Tutelos, all Susquehannocks, all that grouping of people that were combined and amalgamated together in the Ohio country were known as the Mingo. Okay. So Mingo women excel all others in this particular form. Some wear hats or caps secured in trading with the whites, and others do not cover themselves but go bareheaded. So that's what we're seeing in these photos over here. We see in this top photo, this is a diorama in the Fort Pitt Museum there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it shows basically that, I believe this is a description of Jonathan Brickell, who was captured by the Delawares in the 1700s. This is a diorama they basically created out of Brickell's captivity narrative. And you'll see the man, he's got a calico shirt on. He has his match coat wrapped around him, his leggings, his moccasins, a pair of knee garters tied around to help hold his leggings up. He has his tump line with his blanket on his back there. And then he has Brickell tied up with a prisoner tie here. Also on this photo to the right is a friend of mine, Ben Hammond, Delaware tribal member. And he's wearing very much a similar outfit with this calico shirt, match coat, the green wool leggings, and that's what he's got on here. So next slide. Okay, the next slide or account comes from Nicholas Creswell again, like we were talking about. One of the things that he got to witness while he was out there was right after Lord Dunmore's war, as a part of the peace negotiations, the Virginians secured 4 Shawnee hostages, or 4 Shawnee leaders that were taken out to Williamsburg, Virginia, and held as hostages to make sure that there was going to be peace and that the rest of the Shawnees back in Ohio wouldn't continue to raid the frontier settlements during right at the end of Dunmore's war. So he describes those 4 Shawnee headmen that he saw 4 Indian chiefs of the Shawnee Nation who have been at war with the Virginians this summer, but have made peace. And they are sending these people to Williamsburg as hostages. They're tall, manly, well-shaped men of a copper color with black hair, quick piercing eyes, and good features. They have rings of silver in their nose with bobs to them. So those are ball and cone earrings that they're describing, which hang over their upper lip. Their ears are cut from the tips 2/3 of the way round, and that piece is extended with brass wire. So thin brass wire was wrapped around the bottom earlobe as it was cut and distended away from the rest of the ear till it touches their shoulders. In this part, they hang a thin silver plate wrought in flourishes about 3 inches in diameter, with plates of silver around their arms and in their hair, which is all cut off except a long lock on the top of their head. So they're describing a scalp lock. They're all in white man's dress except for breeches, which they refuse to wear. So there you see it again. You know, we are not willing to wear breeches. Instead of which they have a girdle around them with a piece of cloth drawn through their legs and turned over. The girdle appears like a short apron before and behind. All the hair is pulled from their eyebrows and eyelashes, and their faces are painted in different parts with vermilion. They walk remarkably straight and cut a grotesque appearance in this mixed dress. So in this photo to the right, we see Talon Silverhorn dressed much in the manner that is described by Nicholas Creswell in 1774. He has the ear wheels that he's wearing, and these are some examples of some of the original ear wheels that have been collected in museums. These are the ball and cone earrings that were being described as being worn in the nose. So these were worn in the ears and in the nose, these ball and cones. And they were also the same ones that are being described as hanging off of the silver headbands that we saw on the very first slide. So that's what these are. Again, these are some more reproduction silver ear wheels here that we see. And then a pair of moccasins that were collected during the 1700s. I believe these are in the Bata Shoe Museum overseas. And you can see these moccasins again are either smoked real dark, or they're most likely a smoke, but another option is to dye that brain tan deerskin with walnut hulls, and that will give it also a dark brown color as well. But you see the porcupine quill work, and then these white beads also being sewn on for decoration, and the tin cones with the deer hair in them again. This next account comes from Thomas Riddow, who was taken captive in 1788 among the Shawnee, and he actually was the adopted brother of Tecumseh and his brother, the prophet, or Tenskwatawa. And so Riddow gives us this narrative. My dress consisted of a calico shirt made by an Indian woman without a collar, which reached below the waist, a blanket over my shoulders tied around the waist with the bark of a tree. So most likely it could be the interior of the basswood tree. That bark was used to weave tump lines and things like that. So that may be what he's talking about. A pair of good buckskin leggings, which covered almost the thighs and given me by the great war chief. A pair of moccasins in which I had pieces of blue cloth to make my step easier. So what he's saying is they used some spare blue shroud to wrap around his feet, much like socks, before he put his moccasins on. A breech clout between my legs and a girdle around my waist. A small round hat in which the Indian placed a black ostrich feather by way of ornament. The smaller the hat, the more fashionable. So this is an original hat, basically what Riddow is describing. And we see these on paintings where they're wearing these small hats and in descriptions. And we also see these ostrich plumes on trade lists and stuff. So that's what we see here in this left photo on Mike Galban's head. He's got one of these small hats with these ostrich plume stuffed in it here. Okay, so that's what we're seeing in that photo. All right, the next narrative comes to us from Oliver Spencer, who was taken captive in 1790s again. He's the one earlier that described his Shawnee grandmother, Kokachi. And he also is the only one that left us with a physical description of the Shawnee chief Blue Jacket. And it comes from this account right here. So Spencer said about Blue Jacket. Blue Jacket is the most noble in appearance of any Indian I've ever saw. His person is about 6 feet high, was finely proportioned, stout, and muscular. His eyes large, bright, and piercing. His forehead high and broad. His nose aquiline, and his mouth rather wide. His countenance open and intelligent, expressive of firmness and decision. He was dressed in a scarlet frock coat, richly laced with gold and confined about his waist with a party-colored sash. So by party-colored sash, he just means like it was a finger-woven sash of many colors, most likely, bright colors, the red, yellow, stuff like that. There are sashes in collections that I would consider fitting this description that come about in this late 1700s time period. And he had red leggings and moccasins ornamented in the highest style of Indian fashion. On his shoulders, he wore a pair of gold epaulets, and on his arms, broad silver bracelets, while from his neck hung a massive silver gorget and a large medallion of His Majesty George III. So we're seeing a pair of original moccasins that could definitely fit the description that is seen, that Spencer sees Blue Jacket wearing. And on this photo over here of Ben Hammond again, although he doesn't have on the coat described in this account, this is a very similar style of coat, and you get the idea by seeing this actual photo. And on a side note, the coat that Ben is wearing and the outfit that he's wearing is actually taken from a description of the Delaware leader known as Captain White Eyes, who was murdered in 1778 after signing the first treaty with the Americans at Fort Pitt. And these were actually clothes that White Eyes owned. And when he was murdered, there was an inventory taken of his clothing, and this description of these clothing items were what was in his death inventory. So Justin Minard at Fort Pitt used that to recreate this clothing for Ben to wear when we did a treaty event of the 1778 Delaware Treaty a few years ago at Fort Pitt. So that's what you're seeing in this photo. All right, again, I told you that not only do we look at these firsthand accounts, but we also look at these paintings, these original paintings. And here are 3 original 18th century paintings. And these 2 outside ones, there are no description of what tribe these warriors belong to that are being painted. But the description on them is just an Indian war chief, completely decked out for war, basically with a scalp in his hand. So we see these blue wool leggings with the silk. That's most likely what they're trying to represent here on the side, these silk ribbons, and the tops of the silk ribbons left hanging and not, sewn all the way down. He also, has a silver armband. He's got the scalp lock, some hair decoration in there, a powder horn. He's got also a medal, most likely like a King George type medal that he's wearing here. He's got the scalp and then his gun. Same thing on this right side. You're seeing a very similar dress. This is basically the dress for going to war. Everything stripped off except for your breechclout, leggings, and moccasins. Sometimes they would even take leggings off and just have breechclout and moccasins on for warfare. And he has a neck knife that he's wearing here. In the center, this is the only known documented drawing of a Shawnee man that dates to the 18th century. And this painting actually was drawn in 1796, I believe. And it's labeled a Shawnee from the Illinois country. So most likely, this is a man, a warrior from the Shawnee towns very near where Cape Girardeau, Missouri is. So at that time in 1790s, there was a couple of Shawnee towns in Missouri, right on the border of Illinois, and some were near St. Louis, and the bigger towns were down near Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And so that's what we're seeing here is one of the men from probably that town. He's got these red wool leggings on. He's got his deerskin moccasins, leg ties. He's got a bow and arrow. Most likely one of those collarless shirts that were being described by Thomas Riddow. He's got the silver armbands with some ostrich plumes stuck in them. This is a white wool blanket with an indigo bar on it. And I believe this to be what we see on trade lists designated as a French match coat. And you'll see that later. He has the same ear wheels in his ears, a scalp lock, and a little bit of the vermilion paint on his face. So that's what we're seeing. These are also some 18th century paintings. This is an unidentified warrior. You can see he's dressed very much like the previous two, breechclout, leggings, moccasins. He's got his knife kind of tucked into the top of his leggings. He's got his pipe, tomahawk, powder horn, shot pouch, bullet pouch, another one of those medallions, the coins, silver, the George III type medals, his trade gun with a couple of scalps, scalp lock, stretched earlobes, and a spear type. This is a painting of a Mohawk chief by the name of Hendrick, and you can see he's wearing a very fancy, basically a coat with an waistcoat underneath of it, a fancy white linen shirt with ruffles at the neck and the sleeve, and he's got a headscarf with a tricorn hat. And we see these types of items on gift lists that European leaders are gifting to native leaders of various tribes, whether it be Shawnee, Seneca, Cayugas, or Mingos, Delawares, Mohawks. They're all getting very similar clothing items, So that's what we're seeing in this middle photo. And on the left, we're seeing this guy is a white guy. His last name was Caldwell, and he was a military man stationed at Fort Detroit in Michigan, and had a lot of interaction with all of the Ohio tribes during the American Revolutionary War. And he was painted in all of his Indian clothing that he had made up. And the great thing about this, this Caldwell stuff is that not only was he painted wearing this stuff, but all of the objects that he is wearing in this painting are actually he brought back overseas with him and are in collections. Some of them are in the family collection. A lot of this stuff is in the Canadian Museum of Civilization up in Canada. And so we can actually look at these leggings that he's wearing here and see them. We can look at the breechclout that he's wearing in this painting. We can look at the knife and the shot pouch and skunk bag, all of that, and the shirt that he's wearing. We can see it firsthand by going to these collections and looking at it. Next slide shows some more of those 18th century drawings or paintings, and the left two are of Joseph Brant, showing what we were being described earlier as the silver ring brooches that are being worn on the shirts and in the match coats and stuff. So that's what you're seeing on his shoulders. You're seeing a white linen shirt. He's got a match coat, red leggings. It's got the silk ribbon on it. And then this left one again is Joseph Brandt with his white shirt on. He's got his silver armbands on the wrist and his bicep area, his leg ties, moccasins, and his match coat. So, and this is more of a southeastern guy. William McGilvery, I believe is his name, if I remember right. But very similar, still similar style of clothing. Few minor differences that you could tell he's a southeastern guy, but for the most part, the dress is very similar. Here again, the white linen shirts that are the most common trade items. There were two types, you know, some without any decoration, without any of the frills or the lacing around the wristbands or the collar neck opening area here, which is what you see on this fancier version here. And we see that on my buddy Jason here. He's wearing these white linen shirts. Again, another period painting of I believe this is Samson Okum, who was a Stockbridge Munsee Mohican, Delaware group of Indians who now are in Wisconsin, were removed to Wisconsin, but he's wearing just a white linen shirt, much like you see in this example collected in a museum with this shorter collar, stand-up type collar. You can see the buttons and the painting, and he's got his blue match coat wrapped around him as well. Okay, we were talking earlier about these calico shirts. So here's a couple of examples of original shirts from the 1700s. This is the Caldwell shirt that we see him wearing in the painting, and it dates to the Revolutionary War period. You can see it has the decoration, the extra, ruffles around the neck and the armbands here. And then this is the Foster shirt. This whole collection of clothing items was collected in the 1790s by a European guy by the name of Andrew Foster. These were clothes that he wore while he was working in Michigan. And so all of these items were saved and have survived for us to look at today to examine how they were constructed. So that's what we're seeing, this calico shirt that he owned. And you can't really see it really well in this photo, but the top of this shirt is decorated with those silver ring brooches. There's a bunch of them stuck on that. Okay, so these are the known 18th century leggings that are in collections today. This is the Caldwell legging. So that is the legging that he's wearing in the painting that we see. And it's red wool with silk ribbon around the top, silk ribbon around down the flap with white edge beads, and it has a stirrup foot strap to help hold it down at the moccasin. Here's another red legging that is the red Stroud. You can see the white selvage edge up top. This has been opened up so that you can see both flaps with the silk ribbon and the beadwork that's done on it. This is another Caldwell legging. This legging was brain tan deerskin, most likely dyed with walnut hulls. But then you can also see that on the flap, it has a ribbon decoration. So this is ribbon sewn on the side, and then there are white edge beads sewn on to the edge of that silk ribbon. It's done not only for decorative purposes, to sew those edge beads on there, but it's also functional as well. It protects the edge of that silk ribbon from fraying and coming apart as you brush against stuff. So not only is it functional, but it is decorative as well. And then these are a green pair of leggings. This is green wool with silk ribbon on the edge flap, and again the white edge beading, and then some bead decorations on the side. And the last one is a red selvage edge legging with silk ribbon on it, known as the messeter legging. And there's some other stuff that was collected with this legging that we'll see here in a minute. Again, these are the Caldwell leggings, and these are the Foster. Better look at the Andrew Foster leggings that we saw in that whole mannequin setup over there. And this is some early examples of the cut and fold ribbon work that became really popular in the 1800s, and we still see today amongst our communities. Folks do this a lot with their powwow regalia and stuff. So that's what we're seeing here. And also you can see that these leggings have buttons on the bottom flap closure area around mid calf to the ankle. That way they could close them down tight and be form fitting to the leg. And you still can slide your foot into them while they're unbuttoned. If you didn't do that, you would never be able to slide your foot all the way down into them because it would get too tight at the bottom. So again, the Caldwell leggings, and then here we see the breech clout, and you can see it's this is gartering, the wool tape, red and green, and then we have silk ribbon around the edge of it, and then it also has a white linen lining on it, so you're not feeling that scratchy wool against your skin. And so this was one of Caldwell's breech clouts that he's seen in that painting with. And then again, the messeter legging, match coat, and breech clout. This is got the silk ribbon decoration on the breech clout here, and then also on the match coat. All right, the last thing we're going to look at is these trade lists that kind of describe what was being taken into the Indian country and traded. So at the end, I'll show you guys a book here that is a good source for folks that want to look at a lot of these trade lists without looking at the originals. That's all in a collected bound book, and that's where a lot of these come from that I'm showing here. This is an account of losses of John Fraser in 1754. He was a trader working in Western Pennsylvania area. And these were things that were taken from him during basically the French and Indian War. So 27 pieces of shrouds, 18 pieces of duffels. Duffels were a type of blanket. They're a thicker wool blanket. And then 13 pieces of half thicks. Half thicks are also wool cloth that were used for legging material. It's not as thick as duffels, but thicker than shroud. And then 46 ditto garlics made into shirts. So this garlics is like a linen type material, and that was going to be used to make white shirts. And then he's got 6.5 ditto of calicos to be made into shirts, gunpowder, bar lead, handkerchiefs, silk handkerchiefs, and then also calamanco silk handkerchiefs, 24 gross of gartering and bed lace. So there's that wool tape that we were talking about, wool gartering and then bed lace used for decorations. We got 17 pieces of the broad ribbons, so your silk ribbons, 23 of the narrower silk ribbons, 13,000 black wampum beads, 8,000 white wampum beads, 4 gross of the silver brooches. And so the list goes on. So you see the hair plates, armbands, all of the things that we're seeing in these descriptions and all of the things that we're also seeing in these paintings are showing up in the trade lists and in archaeological context as well. So you put all of these things together, you get a good picture of what the clothing and the material culture looked like in the 18th century. These are some more trade lists. Again, John Fraser and James Young. You got the shrouds, so 8 pieces of shrouds, 29 or 25 pieces of shrouds, robe, and these are shroud. This is basically your match coats. They're line, or they have gartering and ribbon and bed lace on, on them for decoration, is what they're describing here. Here's a purple half thick, most likely a lot of times used for legging material. Then there are white half thicks used again for legging material. You got thread on here. You got ready-made ruffled shirts, linen, holland, which is another type of linen material, gartering and bed lace, just to use to decorate. Silk handkerchiefs. Here's vermilion, knives, certain types of knives that were traded. And then these Morris bells. Those are those little brass hawk bells that I showed you earlier on. And then we also see brass wire. That's the brass wire that's being used to wrap their ears in, also used to make what's known as Indian razors, which was what we plucked our beards and our body hair out with. And so there you see it on the trade list. Here is a red wool finger woven sash that is from the 1700s, and these white size 8, basically size 8 beads are woven into the sash as the woman is actually weaving the sash out of the individual, yarn fibers. She's pushing these white beads up and locking them in as she's weaving them. So this is an original from the time frame we're talking about. Another original sash, this one in olive green, and also has some porcupine quill work wrapped on the fringe, and then the 10 cones with the deer hair as well on it. Here's a possible look of a trader, a European trader of the 1700s, and some more of these trade lists. I believe this one is list of goods that were at Pittsburgh at Fort Pitt that could be traded, that they could go and access. You see rings, there's brass rings listed on here, Jew's harps, colored thread, looking glasses, which those are mirrors, little pocket mirrors that were used, steel tobacco boxes, snuff boxes, tin boxes. That's those are the items that we saw that those thimbles were in, a tin box like that. That's where they're getting it from. Some other items that are common items of that time frame. These are knitted hats, and we see knitted hats on a lot of these trade lists. And some of them are what you would consider almost like a French hat, a toque, which they're double, not just a single hat, but they were double thickness. And a lot of times they were worn in really cold weather, obviously. We see a tricorn, a beaver felt type hat here. And then this is a trade coat that's a reproduction based on an original that was found in a grave. The whole coat did not survive, but bits and pieces of it did. And those pieces were used to basically, make this reproduction coat based off of coats of the time period that it dates to. So you see these gift coats or trade coats listed as well on these gift lists or these trade lists. So they were usually ranking people would be getting these. War captains, chiefs, folks that held positions within the community are getting these kinds of items. Here's one of the bandana type handkerchiefs, resist dyed one, an original that we see listed on these trade lists here. And in this trade list, it's interesting. This is the prices of goods to be sold to the Indians at Sandusky. So at the Wyandotte town at Upper Sandusky. And it tells you what each thing was worth. So Strouds are equal to $4. Match coats cost $3. Blankets cost $3. And then also on this other side, it tells ratios of other hides to equal a buck or a buck hide. So one fall buck skin is equal to $1. 2 doe skins are equal to $1. 2 spring bucks are equal to $1 skin. 1 large buck beaver, so a large male beaver, is equal to $1. 2 smaller beavers equal to $1. 6 raccoons equal $1. 4 foxes equal $1 skin. 2 fisher equal $1 skin. So it's this idea of just having this random trader out in the woods, haggling over prices on what he is going to give, in goods to some ignorant, Native American, just was not the case in the actual real historic time periods. When we brought our skins in, we knew exactly what we could buy with those skins. It's very much like going to Walmart today. When you go to Walmart, you know how much money you got in your pocket, and you know what things cost on the shelves, so you know exactly what you're going to be able to purchase. You're not going to get swindled. All right, these are original account ledgers from one of the trading posts in Pittsburgh, dating to 1760. So we can actually see what individual Indians were bringing in and what they were leaving the trading post with. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll kind of read a little bit of this out. So in May 3rd, 1760, received of a Shawnee. He brought in 10 raccoons. I can't really tell what that one is. 3 dozen raccoon skins, and it lists the price, what they were worth, each of these skins, and then 3 fall deer skins. And he also brought in cash, a certain amount of cash. And then he bought with that cash and the equivalent from those skins, he bought, looks like 4 3/4 yards of Stroud, some lead, 1 box of vermilion paint, 1.5 yards of purple napped half thick. So he bought purple legging material. On this other side, we see over here, March 17th, 1760, received of a Shawnee. He brought in cash, 1 fisher skin, 30 raccoons, 3 of the same type of raccoons that were, different prices. That's usually what they're denoting, that they were worth different things. 1 beaver skin, 1 cat skin, 34 fall deer skins, and 7 summer deer skins. And then he bought lead, flints, 3 boxes of vermilion paint, the stone brass rings, 2 hoes for the garden for his wife, to work in their garden. He bought Jew's harps, Stroud material, 1 fine shirt, 1 plain shirt, match coats. He bought silver wristbands. And also, again, he bought some yards of that purple napped half thicks for legging material. So these trade lists give you a very good idea of what individual Indians were buying when they went back to the trading post. Here's one that a Shawnee woman brought in: summer skins, a number of summer skins, deer skins, and looks like a small bit of parchment. So it was the deer skin that had the hair removed, but it wasn't tanned yet. And then she bought with that credit 1 mirror, so 1 looking glass, and a large knife, a certain kind of knife, cutto knife is what it was called. So very interesting. Here's the Shawnee leader right here. He brought cash. He brought cash into the trading post. He bought a certain kind of handkerchief, plain man shirt, and a pair of scissors with that money when he came in. So another trade list talking about the same thing. William, a Shawnee, brought 13 fall deer skins. I think it has 5 fall deer skins, 1 ordinary fox skin, and cash. He bought Stroud match coats, a plain shirt. There's that purple half thicks again, Jew's harps, and a hat, a laced hat is what he bought. So very interesting to see exactly what these folks were purchasing with the skins that they were hunting. So with that, that brings us to the end of our presentation. And before we end and I open it up for questions, something that I feel I need to mention is that I know that a lot of the folks that are probably watching this presentation are not Indians and are not Shawnees in particular. And I would venture to say that there's a good amount of non-American Indian reenactors that are watching this presentation from the East. And what I would like to say is that, and to anybody that's watching from a historical site, you know, that operates a historical site that does reenactments, is that the Shawnee Tribe does not support or condone non-Shawnee people basically reenacting or portraying themselves as Shawnees to the public. And when I say non-Shawnees, I mean anyone that is not a member of one of the 3 federally recognized Shawnee communities: the Shawnee Tribe, the Eastern Shawnee Tribe, and the absentee Shawnee Tribe. However, we also would like to say that if you are from a site or plan to operate any kind of a historical interpretation, that you would actually reach out and engage one or all 3 of the federally recognized Shawnee communities to participate or to advise your reenactments. And so that's what I'm asking. You know, if you are going to carry on these things, that you reach out to real Shawnee community members and our tribal, actual tribal government to engage in a meaningful way consultations with our communities to make your historic events better, more historically accurate. Okay. So in saying that, I'd like to end by saying, you know, I appreciate everybody watching this presentation. I hope everyone has learned something from it. So I'd like to say in Yahweh, and now we'll go ahead and open it up for some questions.
Okay, sorry, let me get everything started back up here on my end. The first question, which is not necessarily super about the presentation, it's about one of your images, was back, and I did mark on slide 5. Thomas Rawlinson asks what the jug at the bottom was.
See if we can go up to it here. Which, let's see, let me start.
This, yeah, that.
Which one? Which, this one?
Nope, next one, this one.
This
Down
one here?
Yeah, I'm guessing down by Shannon's foot.
Oh, that's a green glass. Those were just a historical period glass bottle. It has water in it. We use them for water bottles. But during the 18th century, they could have rum, and most likely they had rum in them a lot of times, or water. But that was just a 18th century period green glass bottle. Good question.
Okay, great. Sam Stitt asks, what are the most common anachronisms that you see in this reenactor scene?
I mean, most common. I don't know. They're. It's hard to say. One of the things that the thing that really upsets me is not the fact that, non-Indians are reenacting, which, for the most part, when it's done, because there were a lot of white captives, obviously, during the 18th century. And so there is a place for non-Indian people to wear Indian clothing at some of these historical events when they are portraying white captives. But one of the biggest things that bothers me is when, non-tribal members are portraying themselves in like real life to people, visitors, that they are actually really Indians or have Indian ancestry or actually speak for our communities or represent our communities. And so that's one of the biggest things that bothers me, outside of the fact that majority of the time their clothing is historically inaccurate. They don't do such a great job with accuracy on reproducing this clothing. So that's probably the biggest thing that bothers me about, the reenactor scene.
Great. Abby Ankenman asked, the first-hand accounts are so interesting. Where did you find them from the 18th century?
So I mean, they're everywhere. There's a lot of different books. The great thing is that the computer, you can go to Google Books, and in that Google Books, you can type up like white captivity narratives, Indian captivity narratives, and a list of a lot of these things will come up. You can specifically look up the captivity narrative of Oliver Spencer. You can look up Thomas Riddow. You can look up Jonathan Alder's captivity narrative. So there, John McCullough, there's a whole bunch of these captivity narratives that you can look up. But also, I think to get a lot of people started, let me turn on the light real quick so that folks can see these books, and I'll be right back. So if everyone can see this book, I don't know, can you guys read that? Natalie, are you able to read
Their
that?
bearing is noble and proud.
Yeah. So, and it's by James O'Neill, compiled by James O'Neill. And so this is a collection of narratives regarding the appearance of Native Americans from 1740 to 1850. So in this book, what the editor has done is taken a lot of these firsthand accounts. And a lot of times he's just taken little bits of these accounts and organized it in a year-to-year type basis, and interesting bits from each one of these accounts that describe physical appearance, clothing appearance, and stuff like that. So it's great. It's a great source to read a lot of those little physical appearance accounts. But more valuable than that in this book is in the back, it has a list of bibliography in there. And in that bibliography, that's where you see these firsthand accounts. And then you can go and search out these firsthand accounts based on that bibliography in the back of there. So I would say, and you could probably find this on Amazon.com. I would say get on Amazon.com and look for this book. But because I don't know if they're being printed anymore, to be honest with you. I've had them for a long time. But that first volume is about physical appearances and firsthand accounts. And then there's a second volume that you can see that has a lot of just trade lists in it. So it's a lot of these original trade lists that he's actually, typed out. And there are some, physical accounts in there too, of what folks look like and stuff. But mainly this gives just the trade lists and things like that. So again, in the back, there's a bibliography that you can look at as well. So those are probably the two easiest books for folks to get to start them out, to get a more correct idea of things. So I hope that helped.
Okay, so Sponge asks, do you know if the city/river of Vermilion in Ohio is named after the paint that the Shawnee and other tribes of the area used?
Most likely, there's a lot of Vermilion rivers. There's one in Indiana as well, and Vermilion creeks, rivers. But the clay that was found along those rivers is not the same as the Vermilion on the trade list. So the clay, the clay is a reddish color, and a lot of times it was burned. It could be red to orange, and a lot of times it was burned to make it a brighter red color. But really, all that is iron oxides, iron rust in the clay, and so that was burned and powdered, and then that's where red ochre comes from. So red ochre is a little bit darker in color than the Vermilion. The Vermilion was solely by trade. They got that solely by trade, but the red ochre and a lot of other colors they made themselves from natural materials in the environment. So good question.
William Reynolds says, a fellow PhD candidate has done her thesis on native tattooing. Can you offer some comments?
That's a large thing to comment on, but yes, we do it, and it's described in a lot of these descriptions, and a lot of it is personalized to the individual that had the tattoos. So those aren't really things that people should just be copying and stuff like that. They have specific meaning to the owners and the wearers and stuff like that. So it's really not for the outsider, to be honest with you.
There we go. Ryan Potts, what would have been the reason for burying the ankle ornaments? Were they meant to be recovered, or were they buried once someone was deceased, or as a gift of prayer?
They were put in the grave with the individual that owned them. So that's it was because we took that stuff with us to the other side.
David Foster asks if, to the best of your knowledge, Jeremy, if you know if the Eel River people were part of the Mingo people who immigrated from the East Coast and eventually ended up in Indiana.
No, not to my knowledge. They've always been a part of the Miami Confederacy and are still to this day. They're Algonquian speaking people, and they were absorbed into the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. So there are no Eel River tribe that exists today. No individual Eel River tribal communities exist. But there are Eel River descendants among both the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma and the Peoria Tribe of Oklahoma. Same with the Piankashaws and the Weas or Weatnons. They were absorbed by the Peoria Tribe of Oklahoma. So all related communities.
I think, here we go, Charlie. He says Shiki here. Sorry if I butchered that. Sheki.
Yeah.
Based on what you just said, on non-natives portraying Shawnee, for non-native reenactors, would a shift to a generic portrayal be better for events in dealing with the public rather than being a specific tribe?
No, I would say, Sheki, the best thing would be to portray a white captive and be, tell the public that you are portraying a white captive among a community and get those events to engage with the real communities to get their tribal members there to participate. So that's the best advice that I can give is to just basically portray white captives.
Great. Sam Stitt asks about where do you get your silver items? Do you have any artists that you'd like to highlight or recommend?
Yeah, one guy that I like to use is Mitch Yates. He lives in Pennsylvania. He does a really nice job on the research, and he's a fabulous craftsman. So a lot of the stuff that I have, I've got from Mitch. And then another guy that I've got some earrings from and stuff is Ward Oles. But Mitch is pretty prolific he's really good about getting things out to folks and stuff. And so he's doing a lot of stuff right now. So Mitch Yates is who I would most likely go with, Sam.
Great. Jordan, was there a particular size piece of wool for the match coat?
So roughly they're about 2 yards. Some are a little over 2 yards, but 2 yards is about the standard size for a match coat. So that's basically 6 foot.
And I think this will be the last question just because it's running late. Here's Danny. He says, I'm researching a ledger from Shawnee on Delaware, PA, dated to 1473 that records the sale of a passementerie trim called the None So Pretty, but I've never seen an image of this trim. Have you perhaps encountered it?
No, I have not, unfortunately. I'm not gonna be any help there.
Thank you so much for this presentation. There's a bunch of thank yous, and this is great information in the comments if you have time to read those or want to look at them, Jeremy, but we really appreciate you and appreciate all the work that you put into presenting for us and working with us. And just for everybody else, this is the last presentation of this year's lecture series. We, due to COVID and closures and this and that, our presenter who wanted to do an in-person presentation for September is going to reschedule for next year. So we're hoping to do this again next year. Thank you to Jeremy. Thank you to all of our presenters this year.
Yep. Yahweh, appreciate everybody's time. Hope everybody learned something. Yahweh.